Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. We have our two panelists with us. Hopefully you can see the three of us on the screen. I might ask Colin and Liz just to say a couple of short words, just to do a quick sound check for everyone. If you, I see lots of you have located the chat on the right-hand side. That's a great start. If you can see us and hear us, or conversely, if you can't hear us, just give us a shout. But maybe Colin, you can say something, and Liz, then you can say something, just a quick sound check.
Sure. My name is Colan Nielsen. We're really happy to be here.
And I'm Liz. So
great. Please let us know, feedback to us peeps, that you can, sounds great, looks great, excellent.
Perfect.
And what is lovely is people are telling us where they're listening in from today, which is great. So we've got nearly 700 people registered. We've got around 130 online. People coming from all over, predominantly in the US, which is kind of typical. Some familiar names and some new names. So thanks everyone for giving up an hour and a half of your time today to do this. I really appreciate it. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to jump over to our slide deck, take you through a little bit of housekeeping, give a little bit of intro to the panelists. Then I'm going to get rid of the slide deck as we get into the kind of meat of the webinar. So let me just figure out the controls. Brilliant. I'm just going to do this over here. Okay, fantastic. So welcome to today's webinar. The topic of the webinar is all around strategies, all around shaping local SEO strategies for client success. And this is the agenda that we have for you. Webinar runs for an hour and a half. The first 60 minutes is going to be me firing questions at our two extremely experienced panelists who are both experts in the field of search marketing and specifically local SEO. The agenda's got three parts to it. In this first bit, it's about what to do before you create your strategy, what questions, decisions, and actions need to be tackled. Then we go and talk about how to kind of actually create your strategy, and then once you've created it and it's up and running, how to refine your strategy. Actually got half an hour on that topic, so quite a lot of time kind of dedicated to that. We then look at tracking performance. How do you correctly measure performance, particularly in the offline, online context that a lot of us operate in terms of working with local customers and the kind of transaction point or the kind of call to action being offline. What data sources and tools do we use to kind of track and report to clients. So that's going to occupy our first hour, and then we're going to jump into a 30-minute kind of Q&A. So plenty of time to get your questions in. You'll locate in the kind of bottom of your screen an ask a question module. That's where you should leave your questions. Also, if you like any other questions that have been left there, please do upvote them. When we come to the kind of Q&A section, we'll be looking in there and basically picking off the most popular questions off the top. So hopefully that gives you a clear rundown of what we're going to be covering today. Bit of housekeeping stuff. Webinar is being recorded. It will be available straight after this in terms of the replay, but also we're doing a blog to follow up on Thursday. So you can catch that on the BrightLocal blog on Thursday. We talked about questions. We're also running some polls tonight. So also we want to get obviously people interacting. We also want to understand how the audience approaches strategy themselves and some of the kind of issues and concerns they have around that. So we're running 3 polls tonight. You can find them in the sort of poll section, also at the kind of bottom of the page. And as we kind of go through the webinar, we'll be kind of tallying up the results of those polls and sort of sharing them back with you kind of in real time. So we get a sense check of how the audience is feeling around the topic of audits and strategy, and then also kind of tying that back to the topics of the webinar. So I'm going to now introduce you to our panelists and also actually invite them to say a few words about them. So first up, we have Colin. Colin is the Vice President of Local Search at Sterling Sky. He's been in the industry almost as long as the industry has been around. So Colin, maybe you can embellish that a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. At Sterling Sky, we do local SEO, typically for small to medium size businesses. And I mean, we're really focused on the Google My Business, Google Business Profile side of things, but really everything that kind of contributes to the local search ecosystem, on-site optimization, backlinks, everything is stuff we're doing on a regular basis. I absolutely love local search. And yeah, when I'm not kind of doing stuff directly with our clients here at Sterling Sky, I spend a lot of time at the Google Business, the product forum, and just volunteering my time there, just helping business owners out, which I find very enjoyable.
Thanks, Colin. I don't think we can underestimate the kind of impact and contribution you've made to kind of the local search industry in the sort of 12, 13 years that I've known you. You've been a great advocate of it. You give a huge amount of your time and knowledge to the industry. You've been a huge part of our webinar series in the past, helping us out as well as being a speaker. So always great to kind of connect with you, Colin. Always great to have you.
Thank you so much
for giving up more of your time and knowledge. And we also have Elizabeth Linder, otherwise known as Liz, from Kickpoint. Liz is an SEO strategist. This is actually the first time Liz has graced us with her presence on a kind of BrightLocal webinar. So very excited to have a new panelist, a new face on our webinars. Both our panelists are actually from Canada, so it's very much got a north of the border flavour, this particular webinar. But Liz, maybe you can tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I've been with Kickpoint, I think, coming up to 4 or 5 years. It's kind of hard to tell time with the last few years that we've had. Like you've said, I'm an SEO strategist, and that involves just that. I create a lot of strategies. I do a lot of SEO work, not always local, but local is my special expertise. I love local. Everything under the sun. I feel like I could talk about this forever, so I don't want to dive too deep. Anytime I'm not working, I'm usually on Twitter. I am obsessed with sharing all the knowledge that everyone has. Anytime there's a conference, you'll usually find me sharing a lot of things. I think it's so easy not to be able to get access to some of this stuff, or not know what's happening, or not have the time to do it. So I always like to do my part and share everything so everyone can educate themselves. So.
Brilliant, Liz. Well, thank you. That's incredibly generous, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your viewpoints on these things. We haven't had the benefit of your wisdom on a webinar before, so I'm looking forward to hearing your unique take on some of the topics that we'll be discussing. And I love the fact that you're nicknamed the defender of GMB listings and the protector of small businesses. It sounds like an absolute local search warrior. So great to have you. Great to have you with us today. We also have a third member of the team that is sort of silently operating in the background. That is the lovely Claire Carlisle. Claire is actually our resident local SEO expert at BrightLocal, but she also does a lot of kind of client work and consultancy work under Claire Carlisle Marketing. She's a very well-known figure within the local search space. She's an absolutely wonderful character, and Claire's role today is to help people out sort of behind the scenes. So any sort of chats that you've got going on the kind of right-hand side, Claire might jump in, answer questions, give links out to various things that get mentioned, and help to sort of move things along and help people to kind of get value from the kind of chat interaction. She's also going to be helping to answer kind of questions. So for the last webinar, for example, we had like 35 questions. We didn't quite get to them all, and a few people I think left a little bit sort of frustrated that we didn't answer their questions. Obviously, I apologize for doing that. This time we've got Claire on board. She's going to be jumping into the questions and providing text answers, so that if we don't get to sort of verbally answer your question on air, Claire's going to answer it through the text. So hopefully everyone will leave the webinar having got a great detailed answer to their question. So huge thanks to Claire, who is operating silently but brilliantly in the background. So this is the first part of our webinar. This is the first part of the agenda. It's about what to do before you kind of create your strategy. And there are 3 things looking at. What are the questions you need to ask? What decisions you need to make? And how do you set targets and manage customers' expectations? So I'm going to get rid of the slide deck now. Just go back to the 3 panels. And Liz, if it's okay with you, I'm going to come to you with this first question. In your opinion, and from your experience, what are the most important 3 questions you need to ask a client before starting to work on a new strategy for them?
Definitely. I think number 1 is always goals. Goals, all the goals. And be as specific as you possibly can. It's easy to say, as a local business, just more business. But definitely want to be more specific. What kind of business? What kind of goal are you looking for? This could be something more specific, like a type of company would find more value with a phone call by actually being able to talk to their customers directly. It just helps with their internal business process and booking the right time and all that kind of stuff. So making sure that, we don't just want more business, we want more phone calls specifically, versus something like having a bunch of forms on the site. Instead, we want to drive more people to call, right? So just making sure you're really specific with your goals, and it just helps with tracking down the road and making sure, is this strategy doing what we want it to do? I also had, who are your top competitors? but not just who they think their top competitors are, but who do they want to compete with. I think that opens up a really good conversation of, these are the types of companies that we want to compete with, but they have a bunch of locations, but actually we plan on expanding. We plan on having more locations. And these are conversations that might not come up if they just say, oh, well, right now, these are our competitors. I've definitely seen clients just answer base questions, but not add a little bit more. So we definitely want to dig a little more out of them. And I think the last one I had was to describe who are their best kind of clients. It's almost a better way of saying who's your target audience, because that can get very bland. Having them describe the best kind of people they want to be bringing to their business just makes content and updating anything on the site just a little more targeted towards the customer journey and towards the people that they really want to have in the business. Because again, a lead can be a lead, but it's only good if it's a valuable lead to that business. So those are my top 3.
Fascinating. Colin, I'm going to come to you in a second, but Liz, I just want to go ask you some sort of follow-on questions to that. When you ask these questions, what's the format that you take? Is it a form you send them, a survey? Is it done for a workshop? What gets the best results and why?
Yeah, at Kickpoint, we actually do a discovery process. And it usually, there's a whole detailed outline of what the discovery process looks like. I think Dana talked about it at MozCon 2020. And I do think I left a link, but if not, I will tweet out some of this stuff afterwards. But essentially we have a kickoff call, and then we send out a document full of questions, like a Google Doc that asks all of this stuff. And then it gives us kind of like a trial to see how are they going to get information to us as well. How do they respond? What kind of information will they give? It kind of gives us a good idea of, how much effort are they going to put into this? How much effort will they help us with, and things like that. But yeah, Google Doc essentially at the moment is the most popular.
You've been in a situation where a customer is just really frustrating to work with at this stage, i.e. you said, how easy are they going to be to work with? You've been in a situation where they're just not giving you what you need.
Oh yeah, definitely. Some people just don't want to write things down, and that makes sense. So sometimes then you schedule a call, or, is this work better for you? And then we've had clients where they give us one word replies, like an okay, in a document. And then as soon as we schedule a call, they open up and talk, and we get all the information. So it's also a good way of finding out what's their best way to communicate to.
Yes, that's a great thing to be alert to, isn't it?
Yes.
To tease out in that process, like what's their communication style? Are they going to be much more open and broad in their answers, verbally versus kind of online as well. Okay, thanks, Liz. Colin, same question for you, but you can't give the same answers, I'm afraid. You've got to come up with 3 entirely different things. No, what questions do you ask when you've got a new engagement?
Yeah, I'll comment on one of Liz's. First of all, which I just thought was brilliant, like identifying who your potential competitors are, or like future competitors. I think that's brilliant, because your main competitor in 2 years from now might not even exist. So I really like that, Liz.
Thanks.
So I think for our 3 main questions, and they're definitely questions you have with the client, but they're also questions you're probably asking internally with your team as you're thinking about this strategy. And I think the first one is, and this may seem obvious, but does it make sense to do this strategy? And the next question that would immediately follow that would be something like, have we done something similar in the past, specifically with a business that's in this same industry as this client that we're thinking about doing the strategy for? Or is this something that we've tested internally before? So I'm a big fan of having a good, like, rigorous testing process. So that would be the first question. It's like, have we done this? Did it work well? Was it somebody in the same industry? If you're checking those boxes off, then it probably makes sense to roll this out. If it doesn't, or maybe you're only checking one of those boxes off, you might want to ask some more questions before rolling this out. The second question I think I would ask, again, this is definitely an internal question. You also want to have this question with the client, depending on what it is, but how would Google feel about this strategy? I think is a really good question to ask, which is really just another way of saying, does this particular strategy break any of Google's guidelines? Specifically with Google Business Profiles, there's explicit guidelines which Google gives you in the Help Center, but then there's also just like implicit things that through like just watching Google and how they react to certain things that you say do with your Google listing. So you want to have that conversation. And then I think the third thing, just going back to what Liz said, is like, what is the goal of the strategy? So like, once we know this makes sense to do, and Google's going to be totally fine with the strategy, we're not going to run into any issues, then we can go, okay, what is the goal of this strategy? Is it traffic? Is it calls? Is it to increase our radius on the GeoGrid ranking report as far as rankings go? So yeah, I would say those are the top three. And these are conversations you're having with the client, but definitely also internally with the team that's going to be responsible for this.
That's a great answer, because when I was sort of phrasing this question, I was always thinking of it in terms of interaction with the client rather than in internal conversations that you'd have. Obviously, both of you work within an agency where you've got colleagues and team members to kind of bounce ideas off. However, for consultants out there who are thinking, great, I'd love to have someone to bounce an idea off, particularly, have we done this before? And how would Google feel about this? Someone as a sounding board, essentially. Do you guys always kind of go internally to your team, or have you ever been in a consultant situation where you've had to lean on others? And any suggestions to how other consultants out there might go about doing that?
I think trying to find, I know I don't have too much experience working outside an agency, so we always have that collaborative mindset. So I always have that access to me. But I think finding those different communities or community groups, Twitter, Slack groups, if that's accessible to you, and just trying to take part in those communities and be active. And then that way, when you have questions, usually more often than not, I just find everyone's really helpful. And that's a really great place to start. Sometimes doing all this research or doing a bunch of Googling to see if someone tested this before, has someone done this, sometimes it just helps. Just go straight to them and ask. I think it never hurts to ask. And if you don't find anything out of it, you're no worse off than you were before. But I think just trying to be part of the community, and then people are really helpful. Yeah.
And one thing I've learned, over the 12 or 13 years being in this industry is people are incredibly generous with their knowledge and incredibly willing to share and help each other out. I mean, there are essentially infinite customers for us to be working with in terms of sort of small businesses. There are 10 million plus in the US alone. I'm always just so impressed and delighted about how willing and open people in the kind of local search community are to share their ideas, to share sort of feedback on what's worked and what hasn't worked. It's an incredibly supportive industry to kind of work within. Colin, a quick follow-on question for you in terms of coming to the have we done this before? From your experience working with new clients, are they always looking for something new and something fresh in terms of a strategy and approach? Or are they quite happy to go with something that's tried and tested and has worked in other capacities?
Yeah, probably the latter for the most part. I don't think there's very many businesses we start working with that want everything like this cutting edge, brand new strategy, because at the end of the day, like all the foundational SEO things still matter big time, right? Foundations are really important. A lot of the foundation stuff is boring, but a lot of that is what drives results. So it's definitely a combination. And usually where we find ourselves, like if you look at the relationship with a client, the first year, sometimes more, is really going to be about foundational things that we all think about when we're thinking about SEO, with some cutting edge stuff peppered in. Maybe we discover there's this opportunity for this practitioner listing strategy that we discovered would work, that we've tested recently or something like that. But it's really going to be the foundational stuff for the first year. And I would actually say if you start working with a business and they're the former and they want all the bells and whistles, that's a red flag for even working with that person in the first place, the expectations are going to be out of whack.
Okay, we'll come and look at expectations in a second. So I guess maybe sticking with you kind of, Colin, then on another question. So you before you start executing, before you start, really, putting the rubber on the road in terms of executing the strategy, what are the main decisions that you have to make first? So, you're essentially building the initial roadmap that you're going to follow. What are the key things that you have to understand and have decided before you start jumping in there and actively working on a new customer?
Yeah, I think the first thing, again, this is looking internally with your team, is like figuring out who on the team is best suited to like execute this particular strategy that you're thinking of rolling out. So for instance, if it's got a link building component to it, then of course you want to make sure that somebody on your team that is doing link building stuff, earned media, looking for opportunities on Haro, whatever it may be, that they're involved with the strategy. Likewise, if this is, let's say you're working with a hospital and they've got 10 locations, and each location has 5 departments, and each of those departments has 6 practitioners that work there, and you're trying to figure out how to strategize the best way to organize those. You absolutely have to have somebody on the team that is pretty high level Google My Business expert that can kind of connect the dots, organize everything there. Content specialist, if this is a content strategy. So I think that's the first thing, is putting the team together that's going to actually execute it. And then maybe another consideration, depending on how you run your agency, is this something that's going to fit into the existing budget, or whatever it may be, or is this something that kind of falls outside of that's going to require additional budget? I think that would probably be a decision you'd want to figure out at the beginning, for sure.
Okay, great, thanks. Liz, same question. What are the decisions that you feel that you need to make before you start effectively executing?
Yeah, definitely everything Colin said about internal. Who's going to be working on this? Who's the best person to do this? And budget, I think, is incredibly important to have a conversation early on and decide, are we doing a monthly bucket and this is what we do, or like what works best for the client as well? And do they actually have the amount that's required for this complete strategy? Do you separate it into little bits, right? I think there's tons of conversations to have about budget. More on the client side then is internally, yes, who's going to be working on the project, but on the client side, who's going to be part of the project or part of the strategy as well. I know we always like to work directly with the subject matter experts. So who is that going to be, and who's going to be the dedicated person that is going to reach out to us, vice versa? Who are the decision makers internally? I'll have to get the exact person who came up with this, but one of our co-director of strategies took a course from Louder Than 10, and I didn't get the name yet, but I will, so I'll share it after this webinar. But they came up with a mystery clause to have in your contracts to say, okay, right from the start of the project, right from the start of this strategy we're going to implement, these are the people that are the decision makers. If anyone else comes in later, and the mystery person, it's a mystery voice, someone pops up and they make changes or they affect how something's going to be implemented, then we have the right to reevaluate this and change it, and that could affect budget, that could affect timelines and things like that. That's just something I think important that you need to take into consideration, because not every internal process for a local business is super clean cut, and these are the people that make decisions, these are don't, right? A lot of times they're great at what they do, but sometimes when it comes to running the business or who has a say in what, they're excited about their work, they're excited about their company. So a lot of people want to have their hand in the basket. I don't know the term I'm trying to get across, but lastly, I think, how much time will they have to help us on this strategy? I think that's especially important in terms if it's a big content work, like lots of content work, lots of new pages and things to create. If it's a specific industry like HVAC or pest control, they're the subject matter experts. They know a lot of things that we're never going to know. And making sure they can help us or can review and approve the content. We don't like it to be, here's the kickoff, now go, we'll do everything. That works for a lot of agencies, but we're smaller. So we also really like to work directly with the companies and make sure what we're creating is actually accurate, because sometimes we base content strategies off of what's already on the site because somebody said, yeah, what's on the site is exactly what we do. A couple months down the road, they're like, oh, we've never done root canals at this clinic or something. And it's like, oh, but it was on your site. And that's something that they don't even know because another agency maybe created a site a long time ago with a past business owner, right? So just making sure you're having these communications, like how much time, who's going to help make the decisions, and who's going to be involved on the client side.
And then couple that with budget, and that essentially rounds out the things, the key decisions you've got to get made before you start working. And also it starts with the goals as well. Understand the clear goals as well. Gives you that kind of bedrock which to build it from. I guess before we kind of start looking at creating and refining the strategy, let's talk about, I guess, setting targets. We talked about goals and understanding, what the calls to action are, what the customer wants to achieve from a particular kind of campaign. But in terms of setting the actual targets that you're going to be kind of going after and setting expectations with the customer so they clearly understand what the time frame is going to be and what returns they can expect. How do you go about setting that? And maybe Liz, you can kind of carry on here. So talk to me about how you set targets and how you manage expectations with customers right at the start.
I think communication, keeping that, I think just that's the over-encompassing thing, is making sure to communicate everything you're doing. I think making sure you know what the key metrics of success are. What are you going to be measured against? What's the strategy actually going to be measured against? Making sure you're using the right ones, especially if the owner, or especially if the person you're working with and the client isn't the owner of the business. Sometimes that is a lot different. Making sure you're using the right ones. Making sure Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager is set up properly and is implemented properly. Most often, unfortunately, it's not. Sometimes someone's tracking a goal and all their goals, someone's like, yeah, we have 300 phone calls, when really that goal is actually just tracking general page views or someone clicking something. It can be wildly different. So I think if Google Analytics or Google Tag Manager isn't set up correctly, that just has to happen first before anything. And that just has to be communicated with the client. It's an important thing because without data, a strategy means nothing. You don't know what's working. You don't know what isn't working. So that has to happen. And then clearly communicating that because we don't have accurate data to compare before the strategy to after, there is a couple months that have to go on before we can start comparing and to know what works best. And if that's the case, sometimes here's the plan for the future. After we have a couple months of data, we can reevaluate a bit and change depending on what kind of data we have now and what's working, what isn't. Not implementing everything at once. Sometimes strategies can be very small even, but just changing everything, doing everything all at once in 1 week because maybe you have the capacity to do so, that's never a good idea. You'll never know why or what it was that made them do better or what it was specifically that made them start to do worse. SEO isn't always that black and white, like good or bad. Lots of things can affect it. So if you implemented 6 different things in a week, and then their rankings started going down or leads started running flat, you won't really know which one of those things caused the problem. So making sure to implement chunks, first high priority items that are similar to each other in different implementation phases, like quarters if it's a whole year strategy. I think I think I mentioned that at the beginning, educating the client on what you're doing and why you're doing it. And over communication. I don't think there is ever a need to be scared of over communication because the more you communicate, the easier it is to manage expectations. If any problem arises, they know that you come to them. You know that you communicate it. If things are going well, you communicate that as well. It builds trust. And I think trust is really important in managing expectations. Without it, it just doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, and it certainly is the bedrock of most kind of good working relationships. You know, both internal with team members, but also with kind of clients. I'm sure we'll come to unearth a little bit more of that in the sort of next section as we kind of go through. But I guess Colin, for you, a sort of similar question, and maybe I guess a question that's sort of interested in my mind is, if you're working with a new client and let's say they don't know you, you know, how do you build up, you know, and you say to them, look, it's going to take us, you know, here's a year's strategy. They go, I don't want to wait a year. I want it in 3 months. You know, how do you handle those clients? Because everyone, you know, wants things cheaper and faster. That's the kind of the attitude that at least, you know, most business owners, and I am one, is always kind of looking to kind of get. So how do you manage expectations with a client that's maybe a bit tricky on that front, or who's impatient and hasn't got the knowledge to understand that things take time, and you know, isn't willing to wait?
Yeah, I think even taking a few steps back, so I'm a big proponent of like performing a local SEO audit, like before starting to work with a business, period, because the audit's going to put together the strategy for the first 6 to 12 months, for instance. But another really important piece of the audit that you know, people aren't doing already, you probably should, is it gives you an opportunity to understand this business owner better in terms of their personality, their behavior, their expectations. And you'll figure out very quickly delivering an audit if they're the type of person that has unrealistic expectations. So you can almost, I would suggest trying to weed out, if you are in a position to do that with your agency, those types of potential clients, so that you're just on the same page right from the get-go. Other than that, I think I'm not. A lot of people say, you know, that you shouldn't overpromise things, which I agree with. But I think what's more important is to not, what I would make sure you're doing is not overpromising, but certainly not underpromising as well. So just being kind of realistic about the situation and being very candid about the risks or the threats with any particular strategy. So I can think of, you know, 2 off the top of my head, and I've seen a couple comments in the chat here about keywords, for instance, in the business name, which is an incredibly hot topic. And we've seen businesses all across the US basically like rebranding to get keywords in their business name. And I would say probably in 99% of those cases, there's an SEO on the other side of that, sort of instructing them on this strategy and what to do to make this work properly. Well, you better believe, or you absolutely should be having a conversation about the risks to doing something like that. The reward is high in a situation like that, but the risks are high too. So I think just not over-promising, but also not under-promising, and just being really upfront about any threats or risks with the strategy. Almost giving yourself a little bit of a margin of safety, so that if something does go wrong, it's not a complete surprise, let's say.
I wonder whether some agency owners or consultants are a bit fearful of that expectation setting, particularly if they're relatively new to providing sort of search marketing. They're wanting to win that first client, or they're looking to expand the agency, and every client win is really important. I wonder how many of them might you know, either overpromise or shortcut that kind of that sort of opening up and being honest and transparent with the customer, for fear of losing them, for fear of them going to someone who's going to offer them the world. I mean, Liz, do you think that's something that, you know, that exists out there, and that you think you ever encountered that in your career?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's also this internal fear of, oh, if my strategy or something I did, it didn't work, so I must be terrible, you know? And I think that's, if an agency has this idea of, oh, like, we're so worried someone's going to jump somewhere else, or, you know, we have to promise the world if anything goes bad, it's our fault. And I think I think there's a really big problem of like not educating about how, I guess I don't want to say how Google works. Does any of us really know exactly how Google works? But this idea of educating and doing that explanation, having that conversation, yes, it takes a little bit of time, but I think them knowing that they're not in the dark and you're some wizard that's doing something that they have no idea what to do. And that's okay. Some clients are like, you do, I don't want to know about it. But I think what's really good at managing that expectation, worrying about it, is finding those people and just trying to push that conversation, trying to have it. Some people just will not want to have it. But I think separating yourself from the successes and the fails and saying, this is Google, this is search engines, this is what they do. Things change every day. Algorithms pop up out of nowhere. Algorithms happen, and then Google is like, oops, sorry. And then they clean it up a little bit because it didn't do what they wanted it to do, or it had this really negative impact on a lot of clients or businesses. And they're like, oh yeah, that didn't work out, so let's just fix it in the next one. And we have no control over that. So I think really separating yourself, like, we're not a terrible agency. I'm not a terrible SEO if this didn't work out during this specific timeline. I think I could go on forever. I think it just comes down to just telling clients, this is how it is and this is how it works.
Yeah, but your name's in the chat said, go Liz, you're preaching really perfectly, and saying that you don't have a magic wand is great. Right, okay, thank you. We're going to move on to the next section, which is about kind of creating and refining your strategy. I'm just going to jump back into the sort of slide deck, and actually the first thing to do is share a couple of the results from the poll. So thanks to everyone who kind of took part in the poll. The first poll asked a question like, do you have a strategy playbook that you use for every customer? And interestingly, the majority were saying no, we adapt it for each client. Well, some say yes, we use the same tactics, and actually only a very, very small number said no, we don't have a strategy at all yet. So it looks like some people basically, they have a playbook, but they do adapt it. So they make a modification of that for each client they work with, which makes a lot of sense, because a lot of the tactics, as you applied, Colin, will be consistent and powerful for businesses of different industries and different sort of sizes. So actually you can apply a lot of that across the board. The second question, or the second poll we ran was, do you ever find it difficult to get buy-in from clients on your strategy? And it looks like a lot of people are finding it, finding it hard to kind of get that buy-in. Not all the time, but at least some of the time, or to kind of some degree. And I guess you probably wouldn't be on a webinar all about local SEO strategy if you were kind of getting perfect buy-in 100% of the time from customers. So, okay, so now we're going to jump into talking about kind of creating and refining your strategy. This is where we're going to spend the next sort of 25 minutes or so, really kind of diving into this. Okay, so let's go back to here. Colin, I'm going to come to you first then. What are the kind of, I guess, do you have any kind of go-to tactics in your strategy that you use every time you put a strategy in place, regardless of client goals or size or industry? Is there anything that you just know you're going to do, and that's always a key part of your strategy?
Yeah, so specific like tactics. So the first one that comes to mind would actually probably be internal linking. And cause I was trying to think of the different things that are involved with, like, different things you're doing in local. So if you're doing content, you absolutely, obviously need to be thinking about internal linking, identifying pages that are related and connecting them together. But even if you're, going back to the hospital example, if you're running a hospital or managing Google Business Profile for a hospital, and they've got 10 doctors that all work there, you have to be able to put together the actual practitioner listing strategy. But a big part of that process will be creating, identifying which page each one of those practitioner listings should link to on the website. But then also the internal links that are happening on that page, which is the proper page that you're connecting the listing to, are extremely potent. And you can be very creative with that in terms of like the type of anchor text you're using, the further like internal pages that you're linking that GMB landing page to, are all going to have a tremendous impact. So whether it's you're thinking about Google My Business or just the website itself, internal linking is always top of mind for us, for sure.
Is that also something that you tackle first and foremost? Is that your is that the first thing you try and get right in the strategy?
It's definitely up there. If we go back a few years, before we really understood how internal links impacted local rankings specifically, it was kind of just part of the overall strategy. But now that we understand it better and we test it on an ongoing basis, not only is it part of the top of everything we do, but if we're going to an existing client, let's say, that's been with us for 3, 4, 5 years, and we're trying to figure out how to, we're looking at the GeoGrid ranking report, and we're doing pretty good within our vicinity, but there's this little pocket up here where we're positioned 4, 5, 6. You can be very strategic about some of the internal linking that you're doing from that GMB landing page to other pages to actually try and get into the 3-pack in a wider area. So yeah, it's top of mind all the time these days.
Okay. And I guess kind of going beyond that, you talked about internal linking, which is great. What are the sort of key elements, sort of tactics that are almost ever present in your strategies?
Oh, you can go, Colin. Sorry.
Was that over? Oh no, sorry. Was that over to Liz?
No, sorry, Colin. I was just going a little bit further with you. Then I'll come to Liz next.
Yeah. So the other one I had top of mind was just updating existing high performance or really important content comes into play. So again, just as a general strategy, identifying pages that have performed well over the years and figuring out how to make them better so they can continue to perform well is important. But even if you get really granular, and again, I'm using this example a ton, but if you're building out practitioner listings, the actual content that's on that page that's about that doctor and the types of specific services that they perform, updating that on a regular basis is going to have a huge impact on your local rankings as well. So just having a process for like ongoing rigorous updates to high performance content and a good process for identifying and like keeping an eye on those pieces of content over time would be another one.
Okay. You haven't mentioned GMB or GBP there, kind of, Colin. Given how much time and effort you spend around that, I'm surprised.
So it's interesting you say that. So the thing though is when I talk about internal linking and the updating the content, it has a massive direct impact on the Google My Business side of things. So I think these days when I'm thinking about Google My Business performance, let's say, 50% of the time I'm thinking about the website and the signals that website is contributing towards the local algorithm specifically. Because really at the end of the day, there's really only 5 things inside the Google My Business dashboard that like directly impact ranking. Everything else is coming from the website or some offsite source.
And I guess for those who maybe aren't as familiar, what are those 5 things?
Yeah, so if you're looking at your dashboard, kind of going from the top, the business name, obviously, unfortunately, or however you want to look at it, is still a big factor. Then we come down to the categories. Primary category is still, I think in the recent local search ranking factors, it was like number 2 maybe out of all the ranking factors. Then if we move down to the actual website link, so the page on the website that you're connecting the Google business listing to, huge ranking factor. Reviews, definitely a ranking factor. And then the other one I include with that, based on some testing we did last year, was some of the attributes actually impact ranking as well. For instance, if you select the women-owned or identifies as women-owned attribute, that can help you rank for people searching for something like, women paralegal, something like that near me. Definitely impacts that from a ranking perspective.
Okay, great, interesting. I wasn't that aware of the impact that attributes had. And Liz, I guess sort of similar question for you. Maybe you could start us off with a list of what are the kind of go-to factors that you think are ever present in all or almost all of the strategies that you work on.
Yeah, I always start with keyword research. After discovery, you kind of already know and have a good idea of what's going to be included, but I think keyword research is good to confirm exactly what changes you're going to need to make, any future content updates, all these sort of things, solidify the right category, let's say, in the Google Business Profile, anything like that. Claire actually has a course on BrightLocal for local keyword research. So definitely look at that, check that out. It's free, it's great. Yeah, I have to shout out Claire whenever possible. I'll always mention her. Google Business Profile optimization. So everything Colin said about rank and like looking back at what's on the website and making sure, because that is so important. That's what drives it. But also making sure you're taking advantage of all the features that maybe aren't going to help you rank. But if you are in the local map pack or at least in local finder in Google Maps, making sure your listing stands out. More often than not, we have seen where leads and phone calls and things from Google Business Profiles increase by making sure there are better photos. You're utilizing messages. So you have that fun, request a quote button. They have all of those big, bright features, Google Posts, question and answers, making sure like everything's filled out as much as it can be. There's so many features and I never see anyone using all of them. And it's impossible sometimes to get clients to do every single one. So trying to make sure that you're making the most out of a Google Business Profile, managing reputation, so reviews, making sure the client's asking for reviews, responding to both positive and negative reviews, learning from the reviews and doing better. General on-page improvements. I'm not going to go too far into that. Colin covered a lot of that really well. Citations, not going out and just building a million citations on all the websites you can think, no. But making sure that all the information is accurate. Even if the client hasn't moved businesses or had a new owner, changed the name, you'd be surprised how much incorrect information is out there. So making sure the top listings like Bing, Yelp, Apple Maps, Google Business Profile, they're all correct. We actually had a client that was a lawyer, moved from one firm to another, but didn't have a lot of citations, not legal citations, didn't have a practitioner listing. The lawyer's name was in a different form, like a nickname, but not a nickname on a bunch of different listings. So cleaning that all up, creating a Google Business Profile, that alone made the biggest difference. So it sometimes isn't always this big content strategy. It was just the little things that cleaned up the SERP for a branded SERP. And then I think spam fighting. Spam is more prevalent in some industries than others, but it's not always quick to remove. But when it does, I think it can make a really big impact on rankings if you have 3 or 4 really spammy businesses that are just taking advantage of the name change incorrectly on your Google Business Profile. And yeah, unfortunately, getting them kicked off makes your client's business move up. That doesn't always happen, but definitely do Google searches in incognito, see what's coming up, because sometimes it's a really easy thing to clear out. Sometimes it's not always easy, but.
Okay, thank you. I guess a follow-on question for you, Liz. So you guys know are the key things that often form part of your strategy. How do you know when it's time to adapt that strategy? How do you know when what you set out to do is either doing so well that you've got to do more of it, or you've got to change it up because it's not working? What are you looking out for? How do you know about it? And when is the time to make that change? How do you know?
Yeah, as long as we have tracking set up correctly, we created a proper dashboard. We know the KPIs we're trying to look at to see is it doing well or not, but also looking at just traffic in general and all types of conversions. But if it's going flat or if it starts to go down, if it's not reaching the goal we originally talked about, or we're not meeting that goal, or it's not climbing, it's very dependent. But if it isn't doing as well as we planned, or if things start to go down in a downward trend, that's when it starts to look like, okay, what's not working now? Was there an algorithm update? Was there a big change? Did something happen in Google? Google Search Console is also a really easy way to kind of pinpoint changes. Looking at clicks, not impressions, clicks. What are you getting clicks for now? What aren't you getting clicks for anymore? If there's a big drastic downfall of, let's say, branded clicks even, or location keywords, anything like that, like mover in Austin or something, if it went down a ton, that's a good indicator of, okay, like, did our rankings get affected? Looking at a rank tracker, if that's something you have set up. I think when to know for changes, I always think every time you implement something, at least giving a couple months. Some people say after a week or 2 weeks, but if it's a big content change or anything like that, like, give it at least 30 days, give it some time. I still have instances where we'll write something new and it gets indexed right away, but nothing really happens. And then in 3 to 4 months, tons of traffic, it's ranking #1 now and it's doing really well. So I think just giving it time and communicating that this stuff takes time. It's never really an overnight success. There are some things, like some changes in Google Business Profile can change right overnight, but I wouldn't necessarily promote that. Yeah, I think just noticing if things start to go down and then backtracking to what was changed. What is it that's doing bad? And then tying that together.
Okay, thanks. Colan, you mentioned earlier that you're a big fan of testing as part of the kind of work that you do. I guess, and how do you incorporate kind of testing within the strategy so that you're able to always refine and improve it? And I guess I've got a question around you. I think you also said, don't do everything at once. I mean, Liz said, like, space it out. How do you sequence what you deliver for customers, and how do you test against it so you know which bits to change and which to keep doing?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the data first and foremost, because I think too with some strategies, and another really important thing in terms of having them come to fruition or get to the point where it's worked out or not worked out, is removing any like personal biases, like emotions almost, from the situation. So for example, you might really love the sort of new style. We see these like hamburger menus, and you love it and you want to implement this, and it becomes a strategy, and the data is telling you one thing, but it's really hard to let go. Maybe conversions have dropped or traffic or what have you is going down since implementing this beautiful looking hamburger menu. So I think it's important to be able to just kind of remove yourself from that and really just focus on the data. And then as far as like refining the process, when you're in the testing phase, it's kind of one thing, because it's not necessarily having a direct impact on the client, because you're still trying to figure out what's going to work. Once you actually roll the strategy out to different clients, you're still going to see different things happen over time, good, bad, surprises, things you never thought about or considered in the testing process. That's when we would definitely circle back and either retest, create a second test around this specific thing with a few different parameters, because XYZ happened in this case when we rolled it out. So it's really just having that nice systematized, organized kind of process for testing things, rolling it out, and then going back to the drawing board. And again, removing emotions and just not being afraid to fail when it comes to a lot of this stuff, because it's the only way that you're going to figure out new stuff, is to kind of screw up a bunch on the way there.
In terms of sort of scenarios where you've got a client who's a little bit nervous, or they're potentially kind of sort of skeptical, how important is it to factor quick wins into the strategy that you kind of work on, so that you can validate some of the stuff you said to them, you can build up some trust with them? And then do you have anything that you utilize to enable you to do that, to show them that for them to trust in you, that you'll take them in the right direction, and that they should be able to give you a bit more patience, a bit more kind of time? So Colan, I guess you could answer that.
Yeah, I think for those first few months when you're working with a business and you're putting together these sort of grand plans, like longer term type strategies, in the meantime, that's where you can definitely focus on going back to those 5 things, for instance, that directly impact ranking in the dashboard. If it's a dentist that you're just starting to work with, what are the chances that that they knew that there's, I think it's 13 or 14 different potential categories that you could select. So there's huge opportunity right there within month 1 or month 2 to tweak the categories, to create a practitioner listing with one of the other categories and start ranking for that thing pretty quickly. Or going back to what Liz said about spam fighting and it being included in almost every strategy, which actually, the more I think about it, I really agree with, because if you're looking at the 3-pack or you're looking across a GeoGrid ranking report and you can see your whole market, and we rank really well here, but as soon as we get here, we start to drop to position 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Mm-hmm. If you can go into those specific pins on that report, you click on it, see who's actually ranking there, and if 1 or 2 of them are spam, that's an instant win, or a 2-week win, or however long it takes Google to actually take action, which could actually be more than 2 weeks, depending on how hard you're pushing Google. So yeah, things like the categories, changing up the page that you're linking to when you first start working with a client, spam fighting, all can have pretty much immediate impacts while you're still sort of working out some of the longer term strategies. So that's why you want to have a nice kind of mix of high impact, low effort stuff with this more longer term, it's going to pay dividends off in the long run, like an investment would, kind of thing.
Liz, do you have any kind of quick wins or high impact things that you'd like to do early on just to give the client confidence?
I think it's, unfortunately, I feel like I worry this might sound bad, but it's definitely not just to give them confidence. It's just, that's a high priority item because it's minimal effort and makes the biggest impact. So it's, no matter what, any of those things are always going to be part of a strategy. So we do them. And explaining, again, like just that communicating, what am I doing and why, that'll help. I think I haven't had too many conversations where having to really describe that or give that confidence of, look, this is really quick. This is really this, and here, we'll do this. Look, see, it made a really fast impact. It's always been an overall explanation of this all has to be done. It's all important. And just really pushing that, because I think it's a little more valuable to them. And if that's something that sometimes a client doesn't want to hear, that's maybe not that's not important to them, then will the rest of this actually be implemented? Will the long-term stuff really be implemented? And I think that's just someone that maybe it's not the best working relationship, but.
Okay. Liz, in your work, we've talked a lot about SEO tactics and organic tactics. Liz, at Kitpoint, do you do much paid work, paid social or paid sort of PPC or local service ads? So how do you effectively combine use of paid and use of organic opportunities to deliver, I guess, the best optimal return for customers, either maybe early on and long term? Do you look to sort of have the same strategy both early on and long term, or do you look to shift the balance at some point towards one or the other, paid or organic?
Yeah, I think that just always depends on, I feel like I'm saying that a lot. That always depends on the budget that the client has and their willingness to, I guess, the amount of ads in a local SERP. Are there a lot? Is it a competitive field? Like, are there a ton of ads? Do we have to be in them? One, what's their budget? Do they have budget for ads? And then 3, their actual willingness to do the organic or SEO work that has to be done. Sometimes it's not something that, we can't pump out all this content or all these service pages that you didn't have, that you should have. We need you to approve them, right? Like, what does this process look like? So if you're an HVAC company and you install air conditioners and part of the content on the page is, describing your installation process or how it works, like, we need you to approve that. We need you to give us the go ahead, especially if that's important for the client, but sometimes they're just really busy. They don't want to do it. You can't always win with clients. So I think sometimes in that aspect, we actually have a client where ads are doing really well for them locally, even local service ads and things like that. So that's where the budget goes. That's where most of the time goes, is into ads, because they're busy, and it's just, they're not worried about it. The SEO work that we can do is making a small impact, and it's slowly growing. So they're more focused on ads. But I think it also depends on how competitive the industry is. If you don't actually have a physical location in an area that you want to target, ads is a great way to help you rank better there if you can't rank organically. And I think branded campaigns are a favorite because they're very inexpensive compared to other campaigns. Try Googling your brand or the client's brand, incognito browser, anything, and just to see what kind of ads are popping up, what other people are bidding on their name. If that's happening a lot, then setting up a branded campaign, it's usually quite inexpensive. And it just helps you stay on top and make sure that your branded SERP looks better and that you're the one getting clicks and not somebody else.
Okay, thanks. I'm just conscious of time, and we sort of reached the sort of hour mark. I guess we've got a couple of questions that we're not going to be able to get to, but I want to get to all the attendees' questions, so we'll go there pretty quickly. I guess the final section we're going to talk about is about kind of tracking sort of performance. I guess there's one question in there that I think we want to know is what kind of your kind of go-to tools you use, and what's in your toolkit that helps you plan, organize, and sort of track performance? I mean, do you have a sort of tech stack that you kind of always use, and what are your favorite tools and why, particularly around sort of strategy and then implementation, sort of tracking? So Colan, I guess come to you first on that.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, like the tool I find myself using more than any other tool would be like a GeoGrid rank tracker. There's some great ones out there. Miles, you guys do a great job. Places Scout is another one I enjoy using. The reason they're so potent is that they almost play into any type of strategy that you're doing these days, because of the fact that, especially in light of the vicinity updates, that proximity is such a dramatic ranking factor. If you can't actually look at your market or wherever it is that you expect or want to be ranking across and understand what it looks like at a keyword level, then in my opinion, it becomes really challenging to put really effective strategies together. And just to give you two quick examples, once again, practitioner listings, let's use real estate as an example. And if you've got a real estate agency that you're doing work for, they have their main location, which is for the actual agency. And let's say there's 10 different real estate agents that work there. Google's totally fine with you creating practitioner listings for each one of those realtors at their homes, right? So you could set it up as a service area business, clear the address. And if you wanted to build that strategy out, you wouldn't want to create them at their residential address if that address was within an area that was already where the agency as a whole was ranking. So if you can identify that, okay, they actually live over here, and this is where our ranking stops from our main agency, then okay, that's a check mark. Let's move forward with building out a practitioner listing strategy. Or another big one these days, and these are real conversations that I'm having a lot of with business owners, is helping them think about opening second or third locations. There's, we've got a bit of a checklist that we use for identifying that, but a big part of that is looking at the GeoGrid and going like, okay, here's 5 addresses. 3 of them are in areas where you're already covering with your first office, but this other one falls outside of that. So why don't we give that one a bit more priority, because that'll expand sort of our proximity from a ranking perspective. So GeoGrid ranking trackers, and then for project management type stuff, I know people have different strong feelings about some of these tools, but I really like Asana for keeping things organized, Slack, obviously, and then just making sure that you've got goals set up properly in analytics is going to be huge. And then I think as far as the performance part and communicating everything, again, you just have to have a really good system for monthly reporting, phone calls, client meetings, stuff like that.
Okay, great, Colin, thank you. And Liz, I guess similar for you, what are your kind of go-to tools and tech stack?
Honestly, pretty much very similar to what Colin said. I don't think I have anything too much different to add, just making sure you're communicating in the best way that the client likes to be communicated with. If that's a phone call to go over things once a month, bi-weekly, then you do that. If it's having a board on Asana to track little action items to do things, where things are at. Set that up. If it's a monthly dashboard report, a local dashboard report, make sure that's set up and sent out to them all the time. It's whatever works best for the client.
Okay, great. And I guess anyone who's listening in who's got some own sort of go-to tools that they like to use, please feel free to share them in the chat on the right-hand side, and maybe a little bit of a blurb about what you like about them so much. Colan, Liz, thank you very much. That's great. Now we're going to jump into the kind of asked question. We've got 16 questions that have been asked. And we're just going to open it up now. We're just going to work our way down the list. We've got around 26 minutes to crunch through as many of these as possible. I'll probably come to one of you with a question, but if the other one of you would like to kind of jump in as well as answer that, please feel free. Obviously, feel free to kind of contradict each other. A bit of conflict is always good for the crowd. So the first question comes from Fred. Thanks a lot, Fred, for asking this. So Fred's got 10 upvotes in this question, which is great. I want to know how to show my client month-to-month progress, like before you hire me and now after you hired me. What's the best way to do that? That provides, I guess ultimately trying to give the client confidence that work is being done. So Liz, if you had to, what do you do to give that before and after experience to clients in a really clear way?
Dana is a savior at Kickpoint for that. Creating the local dashboard, creating a really good one by using the KPIs, and then having that year over year, period over period comparison. I know it can be difficult to use Google Data Studio dashboards sometimes. There's so many resources out there, but learning to create good reports, the ones that ask the questions that the client wants answered. So, how are people getting to your site? Are people contacting you? Are, making sure the dashboard's really clear and actually uses those KPI metrics. And it does have comparison data, and then making sure you also include those text options to explain, like, we didn't have accurate data from X to X or during this time period. So this, you cannot look past this point because we don't have the data yet. And just having those little snippets in the report to make sure that you're explaining all of that. So when they look at it and they're like, oh, well, why can't I see this? You've already explained it there. I think just a good dashboard is number one.
And you use Google Data Studio for that?
Yeah.
What sources are you plugging into it? So what are you pulling into that? Sources?
Yeah, Google Analytics data, Google Search Console data, sometimes some CRM stuff. They can get pretty complicated. It definitely depends on the client of where we're pulling data, but I think generally a lot of it's Google Analytics getting started. I feel like I can't think of a bunch of other little examples, but
that's okay. I get Colin, same question for you. What do you, how do you represent performance to customers in a clear way?
Yeah, I think Liz nailed it. Certainly, from a quantitative perspective, I mean, you have to have your tracking set up properly. It would be wonderful if they already had that in place, or at least to a certain degree, so that you have a little bit of like data before they started working with you. But I also think, like, qualitatively speaking, one of the ways that I have found is a really good way to communicate progress and performance on an ongoing basis is being very visual in your monthly reporting or your updates that you're sending to a client. So for instance, one of my favorite tools, BrightLocal, give you a little plug here, Miles, is the screenshot tool. So you can actually go set a date. It'll show you the SERP screenshot, and then you can compare that to a date 3 months later. And let's just say it's your Google homepage, for instance, or a branded search. Well, you now have this wonderful saved screenshot of what their Google homepage looked like, with, it doesn't have too many bells and whistles, and there's not a lot of stars because maybe review schema wasn't implemented on their About Us page or what have you. And then you compare that to something 3 months later, and it looks like this wonderful Google homepage. You can do the same thing with GeoGrid ranking reports, right? So you run that first report when you start working with the client day one, and then you can screenshot that next to that exact same report, let's say in month 3, And if more of those yellows have turned to green and more of those reds have turned to yellow, that's, in my experience, a far more effective way of like demonstrating what it means that your ranking has gone up versus just showing them something that has like a number 5 that turned to a number 3 or something like that. So being highly visual with colors and like something for a busy business owner that they can just look at and go, that means good, is really important.
Yeah. Do you find, actually, I guess, Liz, do you find that actually sometimes less is more in terms of you don't have to drown them in results? So you just have to have a clear evidence of change.
Yeah, always. Just put what they care about. It doesn't have to be a ton of tables and bunch of numbers. Like, don't do that. Just, if this is the metric, this is what matters, and show that in the best way possible. And yeah, visuals, fantastic. Like, definitely.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's go on to the next question. Great question, Fred. Thanks for that. This one comes from Reg. And I guess Colin will come to you first. If you're a business where you go to a client's location instead of operating from one location, I guess a service area business per se, is it still important to put an address on your Google Business profile and website?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my answer is similar to what Claire put there in the comment, which is, to actually verify the listing in the first place, you absolutely have to put in an address and verify it at whatever the official business address is. There's no way around that particular part of it. Once it's verified, the current process is, if you don't see people there and you go to your customers, then you clear the address so that it's not visible to the public anymore. So as far as I think maybe this question is more, is there benefit to having the address visual versus hidden? I haven't seen any clear-cut cases from a data perspective that it's more beneficial to have your address visible. But like, qualitatively speaking, there's definitely benefits. You know, if you look at a 3-pack, especially now that it has that big map to the right of it, it's gotten a lot bigger. And you're a service area business with your address hidden. The other 2 guys in the 3-pack have their address visible. On that little adjacent map, it's only going to have 2 pins for the 2 people that have their address visible. So they're almost getting this extra layer of visibility, which might contribute to like trust if the user doesn't understand why there's no pin maybe for that business that has their address hidden. But it's actually been a few years since I saw a hard case with data where a business hid its address and their rankings suffered as a result of doing that.
Okay. Thanks. That sort of, I think, kind of clear advice there, sort of trying what Claire said. Next question comes from Tammy, and this one will go to you, please, Liz. Hang on, it's just jumped on my screen somewhere. Oh, where'd it go? It's jumped up. It's been voted up. GMB support suggestions. I have 2 in progress, support tickets from over 8 months ago. Actually, maybe I'm not sure whether actually, Colin, you spent a lot of time in the GMB sort of forum. So maybe I'll put this back to you, Colin. So two support tickets in progress from over 8 months ago that still aren't resolved for suspended listings, really hurting the business substantially, as well as our reputation with them. Is there anything that Tammy can do to get those addressed?
Yeah. Wow. 8 months. That's definitely a long time. So since it's been so long, I would probably submit a new, like a reinstatement request. I would fill out the form because so much time has passed. And plus Google has refined the support team who deals with suspension has refined and changed over time. So like 8 months ago, things were happening slightly differently behind the scenes. So I would definitely do that. If you run into this again, where you don't hear back, they deny your reinstatement request, there is a couple other things you can do. You can actually contact regular Google My Business support and sort of like appeal the decision. Or if you didn't hear back, you can say like, here's my case ID, which you should have gotten from the reinstatement request, and they'll look into it for you. Third option, if you still run into issues, is you can go to the Google My Business forum, do a post there, put all the details, and typically one of the product experts there can take a look and escalate it to Google on your behalf.
Yeah, I guess there are also other services and a beneficiary from steady demand they've got a service that looks a lot at sort of verifications and sort of suspension issues. So if nothing else is working, I guess you could obviously kind of talk to kind of Colan and Liz about it, but I know Ben Fish from Steady Demand, we've had him, run numerous kind of blog posts and take part in webinars all around sort of Google business verification, sort of suspension issues. So there are some definite experts out there if all other avenues are sort of failing you. Okay, great question. Thanks, and thanks for a great answer, Colin. Liz, question for you. This one is actually about kind of local link building. This comes from Raymart. Aside from citations, what links are easy to build, and what's the easiest way to build links for local businesses that can help GMB rankings and don't need reaching out to a web owner? So I guess things that don't require that outreach aspect. Do you have any tactics that you use beyond citations, which might be, I guess, quick and relatively easy wins to build links?
I honestly, without any form of outreach that's going to be very quick and easy, I mean, sponsorships, if that's something you're able to do, local sponsorships, especially if they can kind of be closely related. If you're a physiotherapy clinic, sponsoring local races or track events or anything like that, usually that doesn't involve any form of outreach. Making sure, I guess this takes a little more work, but having some form of list of local resources. I know another kind of physiotherapy, but even a women's clinic that lists a bunch of local resources for women, like pelvic physiotherapy, prenatal yoga, like anything, and listing out a lot of related resources, and they link out to local stuff. Again, that does involve a little bit of outreach to say, hey, I'm a business here and I do this, but usually it's very quick, very easy, low outreach effort. It doesn't take a big reputation building to do that. Sometimes it's just stopping into the business, getting the business owner to say, hey, here's my card. We do this. We're located near you. We saw you. We can have your cards at our business too. It's pretty low effort, but again, it does take a little bit of outreach. But I think sponsorship's probably the one that's sitting on the top of my head that shouldn't involve any form of outreach. That's not a citation. That's closely related to your business category.
I guess I've got a question for you just in general around link building sort of targets, Liz. And I know it's in your bio, I think it said you do a lot of link building. So I'm coming to you as an expert here. For a typical business that you're working with, how many links do you intend to kind of create on their behalf? Let's say each month, that you think it will enable them to have more links than competitors and improve their visibility. Is there a sort of number that you think it's 5, it's 10, it's 15?
There's no number. I think with local links, it's just more about quality and less about, oh, look, I have a link here, link here, link here. It's definitely, is this link actually going to potentially drive traffic? I think that's what I focus on. So with something like a local resources that close similar businesses, that's something we've seen work. Related businesses that share guides or information. We had a physiotherapy, again, client. We wrote a blog post about avoiding back pain while camping. Well, this other local business does river rafting tours and canoe trips on the river, and it involves camping. So they shared that in their guide on how to get prepared for their clients to get prepared. And they're sharing a lot of our content because it'll help. So I think it's more finding those opportunities that are actually going to drive traffic for leads that business cares about, and less about the number. It's link building, I think, having 50 a month, and technically they still have to be high quality, hopefully. That works more for businesses outside local, but local, it's definitely just focused on quality. There is no number that I try to reach specifically.
No, great answer. Thank you. Okay, going to pick up the next question. This comes from Raymart. It says, does Google Stack work? I don't know what Google Stack is, if I'm really honest. It says many agencies are offering this, like Web20 Ranker. Colan, can you help me understand what that question is all about? And does Google Stack work?
Yeah, this is one we actually tested last year at some point. Someone on our team, where, if I remember correctly, just the idea of sort of connecting, through links, et cetera, different Google properties that had information about the business together to try and build relevance, authority. It definitely went into our fail pile in terms of moving the needle or doing anything that we could measure. And I think we put it through 2 different tests. So I guess my answer based on our own testing was that no, it doesn't work, but I guess might need a little bit more context in terms of what working means in this case, like what you mean by working. But as far as driving the business goals we were tracking or the performance, ranking, traffic, et cetera, didn't have an impact and was a failed test.
And just for I guess for a bit more detail, what were the Google properties and how were you trying to connect them?
If I remember correctly, it was through linking through things like Google Sheets and other elements within Google Drive, documents, and linking them together, making sure they're live and sort of crawlable, all that kind of stuff. So just stacking all these different Google products together in various ways that sort of have information about the business.
Okay, interesting. But it didn't work for you, so it's not a tactic that you put in the success and do again part.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. This question comes from Kathleen. She says, "What strategies?" Colin, I'll come to you. What strategies do you use for a business that is physically located in one city but wants to rank in 2 other cities? They're considering setting up 2 additional GBP listings, but want to start with a city that's in the middle.
Yeah, so it's a good strategy if you can do it properly, because proximity is such a huge factor, especially after vicinity update in December. So if you're going to do it, you just have to check off certain boxes. So for instance, the question I always ask myself is if I create a listing and it gets suspended or I need to reach out to Google My Business support, can I prove easily to Google that I have the authority to represent that address? So there's documentation that says, like, this is a business address connected to this business. It should have a unique phone number. It can't have overlapping service areas with your other listings that you have. That's a big one. So if you can actually check all those boxes and sort of, then you're fine. That would be how I would go about getting visibility in other cities. There's other things you could do outside of Google My Business, but if you're really focused on trying to do it with Google My Business, then you can do it. You just have to spend money, commit the resources to actually doing it.
And a part of that is, as you're working with some clients, convincing them to open new branches or new locations in those new areas.
For sure. Yeah, especially if it's a brick and mortar where customers are going to visit, that's typically a more expensive endeavor, even though it doesn't necessarily have to be, depending on the type of business it is. With service area businesses, it's a little bit different because you don't have to worry so much about it looking like a wonderful place to visit, because nobody is going to visit anyways, because you're traveling to your customers, but you still need to check those other boxes, meaning whatever address I'd verified this listing at, because you still need to verify it somewhere. You need to be able to verify with Google through documentation that you had the authority to set it up there, and it's an actual kind of licensed location for that business. So with the service area business, you can do it pretty cheaply, for sure. You just have to check all the boxes to be safe for the long run.
Yeah, and you said that you often use the kind of grid tracker tools to work out where the kind of ranking drop off of the radius out from each location is, to work out where maybe the next location ought to be situated, so that you get a little bit of overlap, but you're not cannibalizing each other.
Yeah, and what you can also do with most of the GeoGrid reports I've used is you can customize where the pins are. So if you're physically located here and there's sort of like these 6 towns surrounding you that you're curious about, you can simply drag those pins or a few of those pins into each of those areas. And when you run the report, you can see how you currently show up in each of those areas. And if it's all red or yellow or something like that, then that's probably a good area to set up shop in, for sure.
That's really interesting. It's a really interesting use case that I haven't actually kind of considered for the another argument for or benefit of the kind of GeoGrid tool. Okay, thank you, and great answer, Colin. Just going down the list here. This is a question that's coming from Pam. I'm going to come to you, Liz. It's a question about local schema. Client is a plumber. The website has city pages for the dozens of cities they serve. Should the schema be on each of these pages or just on the home page?
I think usually for a local business schema, if they have a single location and that's shown, people can come to that location. And then it's like a service area, and that's where all these city pages come in. I think local business schema is saying like, we're a plumber here and these are all our service areas. Usually that's the homepage where it should go or should live. I think if they're linking, depends on the page they're also linking to from the Google Business Profile as well. But I think normally it would go on the homepage unless you have actual physical locations in all these cities and different Google Business Profiles for each one. Linking out to that, and it's like a different location, a separate one, like, or a separate department of that business of some kind. That's when you can start adding it to all those pages. But usually it should be that one central focus page. And so I say the home page generally. That just might be different depending on the business.
I think Pam's clarification is they're a plumber, so people don't go to their location, the plumber comes to them. But is it the case that if you are essentially a single location business, but you serve these areas, then just put it on your homepage? If you've actually got different locations in each of the towns and cities with a different separate GMB profile, then you'd have schema on each of the individual pages. Yeah,
that's how I would do it. I think, Claire did mention there about going to schema at blog posts, but yeah, schema is a very, very intense deep dive. Sometimes it seems very simple, but there's a lot of different nuances. So definitely read that post that she shared. That's a really good cover of this.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just conscious of time, I'm going to try and grab 2 or 3 more questions. Let me go down. This question comes from Dan Watts. I guess for Colin, is there a difference, or what is the difference succinctly between citations and backlinks?
Yeah, Claire did a really good explanation in the comment there, but the way I look at it is a citation is just a mention of your business, right? Name, address, phone number. It doesn't necessarily have to have a link accompanying it to be a citation, but if it does have a link, then wonderful. And then a backlink doesn't have to have the mention of the business anywhere near it. It's just a link back to the website.
Yeah, pretty clear. Thank you very much. Maureen has a question. Do either of you work with franchises, by the way? Much experience working with franchises?
Just a small number.
Okay, so I guess actually, Maureen, we'll probably be planning to do a whole webinar around multi-location SEO and SEO for franchises. I guess kind of question for you, and maybe this is, we've probably got time for kind of 2 more questions. Do you have any suggestions for improving local SEO for franchises? Anything that you do differently or do specifically when working with franchise customers?
Well, I mean, the things you're going to do are going to be the same, like from a tactical perspective. Like same ranking factors apply. None of that changes. So I think really it's going to come down more to procedural type things. Like if you're managing 1,000 locations, there's tools that can help you do that a little bit more efficiently. So I think that, and I'm sure on that particular webinar, you'll go deep onto stuff like that. But I think really where you become more effective as when you're working with franchises, the types of tools that you kind of use so that you can cover more ground in a shorter period of time. Okay, great. And I've spotted an absolute humdinger for our final question of the evening, and we've got about 2 minutes to answer it. So I'm going to give you both, let's say 45 seconds each for your own sort of thoughts on this. Coming to you first, Liz, does adding keywords and geolocation to a Google Business Profile business name still help? Would you advise clients to do it?
Sorry, can you say that question again?
So Google Business Profile name, adding of additional words or locations to the business title.
Oh,
does it work? And would you ever advise clients to do it?
Does it work? Unfortunately, yeah. But I would never. I mean, there's cases where I think this just comes down to doing what's best for your clients, but no, because you'll just confuse them. It won't actually be the business name. You can get suspended, etc. If the business is willing to change their business name, we have had somebody do that, and they can do it properly. They have all the proof, the documentation, and that goes well. I have seen that done, and almost like, why not? But I normally don't advise that unless you can do it properly, or that actually is your business name and it makes sense to do so. But no, it's against guidelines. You get a suspension. That's just bad. I just steer clear. Focus on your customers first.
Okay, great. Good answer. Thank you very much. And Colin, I guess after the vicinity update, what's your take on whether additional keywords, location modifiers within the business name are having more or less of an impact? And what is the data told you so far?
Yeah, so definitely still has an impact, 100%. What seems to have changed since the vicinity update is not, it doesn't appear that Google has just gone out and sort of with this broad stroke or turning down the dial on the name across the board. It doesn't seem like they've done that at all. What seems to be happening is if you look in a really competitive market, and let's just say like the top 10 people in that market are all including keywords in their name, and they've done it legitimately and updated their website and DBAs and all that kind of stuff. It seems that usually within that market, out of those 10 who were dominating, there's now only, say, 1 or 2 or 3 out of those 10 that are still boosted. And so what seems to be happening is for those 3 or 2 or 1 that is still winning after the update, there's other factors that are almost like supporting the fact that they have keywords in the business name. So it seems like Google's always struggled with how to deal with keywords in the name as a ranking factor. And I think the vicinity update to some extent was an answer to that, because they couldn't simply just turn the dial all the way down. I think that would have this almost like catastrophic impact on the search results across the world. But instead, they've sort of mitigated it by sort of factoring in and going like, okay, if you have keywords in your name, great, but I'm not just going to prop you up based on that alone. I'm going to look at some other supporting elements, and if those are in place, we'll pick you out of the 10 people in the market and give you some more visibility. And we're actually doing some studies around that right now, and we'll probably publish some stuff later in the year. But yeah, it's very interesting to see in different markets what has kind of been shuffled and what it looks like now post vicinity and in relationship to keywords in the name.
Yeah, and I also actually we've done a study of around, I think it was around sort of 5,000 kind of keywords registered businesses, really looking at the impact of before and after that algorithm update. Businesses that either had no keywords or clear kind of keyword stuffing, or maybe just keyword rich names, to see if there was any kind of movement impact. If I'm right, I think that it might the research piece might be coming out later on this week. I don't think it's necessarily going to be as detailed as yours, Colin, but we've got some data coming out on the 5,000 or so keywords that we looked at. So hopefully that'll be out sort of shortly and provide a bit more data around this. So we've hit the hour and a half. Let's end it there. Thank you very much to Colin and Liz for sharing their wisdom with us today and answering everyone's questions. Huge thanks to Claire, who has actually gone through and answered all of the questions. So actually this time we managed to get everyone an answer to the questions they posted. So Claire, hugely well done. I've seen your name constantly pinging up on the chat, being massively involved and helping people out. So thank you so much. Thanks for the kind of great feedback we've been getting, keeping my eye on it. A couple of people sort of jimmied me along a couple of times saying, get on with it, you got to go to the next bit. And that's actually really helpful. It gives me, I get a little bit absorbed into the conversation sometimes, and it's nice to have a little bit of feedback coming in on the right-hand side. So I've really enjoyed this evening, two of you. Thank you very much for coming on. Liz, great to have you on on one of our webinars for the first time. I hope we can invite you back and hope encourage you to come back. kind of later in the series or another time. Colan will no doubt come knocking on your door at some point in the future. Again, you've been absolutely fantastic. So a huge thanks to the two of you. Big thanks to Claire and also to Jenny, who's also been working behind the scenes. I believe Alex as well, answering some questions and sharing out links and things like that. And obviously a huge thanks to our audience who have stuck with us for an hour and a half. You've been great. I hope you've got lots of value out of this. The write-up will be available on Thursday if you have to leave this or you want to kind of recap or anything. Have a wonderful, wonderful time wherever you are. I'm now going to press the big end broadcast button and we are over and out. So have a great day, a great evening, a great afternoon, wherever you are. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.